Evelyn Brooks used to believe that careful planning could protect a person from almost anything. For 35 years, she had taught elementary school children how small steps, taken consistently, could solve even the biggest problems. Save a little every month. Finish one task before starting another. Be kind because kindness always returns. At 59, standing outside the county courthouse with a single overnight bag in the trunk of her aging sedan, she realized life didn't always follow lessons that fit neatly inside a classroom. The legal settlement had ended months of financial collapse. Her husband's business had failed under debts neither of them fully understood until it was too late. Loans multiplied, creditors arrived. Their home, built slowly over 3 decades, disappeared through court proceedings. By the time everything had been divided and sold, there was almost nothing left. Evelyn blamed neither the judge nor the law. Sometimes life simply unraveled one decision at a time until there was nothing left to hold together. Judge Martha Collins met her near the courthouse steps before leaving for the afternoon. "Mrs. Brooks," she said gently, "I know today wasn't easy." Evelyn smiled politely. "It could have been worse." The judge studied her for a moment, recognizing the familiar smile people wore when they were trying not to fall apart. "You'll find your footing again." "I hope you're right." "I am." They shook hands before parting. Evelyn climbed into her sedan and drove toward the small furnished room she had rented on the edge of Millhaven. The room held a narrow bed, a second-hand dresser, and one chair beside the window. Everything she still owned fit inside 6 cardboard boxes stacked neatly against one wall. That evening, she opened the last envelope containing the remainder of her savings, $1,018. She quietly smiled at the strange precision of the number. 30 years of marriage reduced to 4 figures written on a bank statement. The next morning, she stopped for coffee at a small diner before searching the newspaper for part-time work. A notice near the back page caught her attention. County Railway Property Auction. Surplus Buildings. Public sale today. Evelyn almost turned the page before one photograph stopped her. An abandoned railway station stood beside overgrown tracks beneath a weathered roof. Broken windows reflected an empty platform where trains hadn't stopped for years. The image awakened a memory she hadn't visited since childhood. Her grandfather Harold had often taken her to that station on Saturday mornings, just to watch trains arrive. He knew every conductor by name and insisted that railway stations were places where lives quietly changed every day. "People think trains only carry passengers," he used to tell her, while they shared sandwiches on the platform bench. "Most days, they carry hope." At 8 years old, she hadn't understood what he meant. Sitting alone in the diner decades later, she wondered if he had. An hour later, Evelyn found herself standing among contractors, salvage companies, and property investors gathered inside the county maintenance yard. Folding chairs faced a temporary auction stage where photographs of abandoned railway properties leaned against easels. Most bidders carried notebooks filled with construction estimates. Evelyn carried only her purse. Several storage sheds sold quickly. Sections of unused rail were purchased for scrap. Then the auctioneer revealed the photograph she had seen in the newspaper. "Former Millhaven Railway Station," he announced. "Sold as is. Structure requires significant restoration. Minimum opening bid, $1,000. Silence settled across the crowd. One contractor quietly shook his head. "Too much work." Another laughed softly. "Costs more to save than to replace." The auctioneer looked across the audience. "Any opening bid?" Before Evelyn could question herself, her bidding card rose into the air. $1,000, the auctioneer called. He waited several seconds. No one answered. Going once. Evelyn felt every sensible thought telling her to lower the card. She needed stability, not another burden. Yet she kept remembering her grandfather smiling beside those old tracks. Going twice. Still no response. The gavel struck. Sold. Several people exchanged sympathetic smiles as Evelyn completed the paperwork. By the time county fees were added, she had spent $1,000, leaving only enough money to cover a few weeks of rent and groceries. Driving toward the station afterward, she wondered whether she had made the most irresponsible decision of her life. The station appeared exactly as it had in the auction photograph. The brick walls still stood proudly despite years of neglect. Ivy climbed around cracked windows. A faded station sign barely remained attached beneath the roofline. Empty benches waited beneath the platform canopy, while rusted rails stretched toward the horizon before disappearing into tall grass. She unlocked the heavy front door using the county keys. The hinges groaned softly as stale air drifted from inside. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight, spilling across the waiting room. Wooden ticket counters remained intact. A large station clock had stopped years earlier, frozen forever at 12 minutes past 4. Evelyn wandered quietly through the building, running her fingertips across worn wood polished smooth by generations of travelers. She stepped into what had once been the station master's office. A sturdy oak desk still faced the platform windows. Empty bookshelves lined one wall. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents removed long ago. Everything looked abandoned, yet strangely orderly. As she turned toward the doorway, something on the dusty wooden floor caught her attention. A line of fresh footprints crossed the office, circled the old desk, and disappeared near the back wall. The surrounding dust had not been disturbed in years. Someone had been inside the abandoned station very recently, searching for something. The fresh footprints remained clear in the dust as Evelyn stood quietly inside the station master's office. She followed them with her eyes instead of her feet, careful not to disturb the only sign that someone else had recently entered the abandoned building. The prints circled the old oak desk, paused near the back wall, then disappeared where the wooden floor was coated with a thicker layer of dust. She considered searching further, but common sense prevailed. The station had been neglected for years. Loose ceiling plaster and weakened floorboards posed enough danger without wandering alone through unfamiliar rooms. She locked the building behind her and drove to the county offices to complete the final ownership transfer. The clerk behind the counter handed her a stamped deed, a ring of aging brass keys, and a thin property folder. "You're officially the owner now," he said with a polite smile. "Not many people wanted that old station." Evelyn slipped the documents into her handbag. "Has anyone asked about it recently?" "Mostly contractors checking demolition schedules." He shrugged. "Can't remember anyone else." Outside, she unfolded the faded property map. The station appeared exactly as she had seen it. Waiting room, ticket office, station master's office, baggage room, freight platform, and storage areas. Nothing unusual appeared on the drawing, yet the fresh footprints suggested someone believed the building still held something worth finding. She returned to the station shortly before noon. This time, another vehicle already sat near the platform. An elderly man wearing a faded railway cap stood looking down the tracks with both hands resting on a walking stick. When he noticed Evelyn approaching, he tipped his cap politely. "You must be the new owner." "I suppose I am." She smiled warmly. "I'm Evelyn Brooks." "Arthur Miller." He extended a weathered hand. "Worked here 42 years. Started as a baggage porter. Retired after the station closed." Evelyn shook his hand. I wasn't expecting visitors. Arthur looked toward the old station building with gentle affection. Neither was I. Heard somebody finally bought the place. Couldn't stay away. Together they stepped inside. Arthur moved slowly but confidently through the waiting room, naming each space as though introducing old friends. Ticket counter over there. Telegraph desk beside the window. Passengers waited along these benches. Station master kept everything running from that office. His voice softened whenever he spoke about the building. It wasn't simply brick and timber to him. It was memory. Evelyn listened while he described winter mornings when travelers filled the platform. Children waved at passing locomotives, and conductors greeted station workers by name. It wasn't a big station, Arthur said, but people remembered it. They entered the station master's office, where the fresh footprints still crossed the dusty floor. Arthur noticed them immediately. His expression tightened, though he said nothing. Instead, he slowly walked toward the old bookshelves lining one wall. Most records disappeared after the railway shut us down, he explained. Passenger registers, telegraph books, train logs. Almost everything went to storage. Almost. Arthur smiled faintly. There's always an almost. Evelyn studied him carefully. You think something stayed behind? He hesitated before answering. Some of the old hands used to say the last station master never left empty-handed. What do you mean? Arthur slowly shook his hand. Only stories. Nothing anyone could prove. Evelyn didn't press him. She had spent decades teaching children that stories often carried truth, even before evidence appeared. While Arthur continued describing the office, Evelyn began brushing dust from the sturdy oak desk with an old cloth she found inside a cabinet. Most drawers stood open and empty. One contained broken pencils, rusted paper clips, and faded railway forms. The bottom drawer resisted at first before sliding open with a long scrape. Inside rested a single leather notebook coated in gray dust. She gently lifted it into the light. Harold Brooks. Her grandfather's name appeared in faded gold letters pressed into the cover. Evelyn felt her breath catch. This was his. Arthur turned quickly. Harold? My grandfather. She carefully opened the notebook. Most pages contained neat observations about trains, platform maintenance, and station operations written in Harold's familiar handwriting. Some entries described conversations with travelers. Others recorded weather conditions or small repairs. Near the back, the notes became shorter and more personal. One unfinished sentence stood alone beneath a heavily underlined date. The station master's office was never completely empty. Evelyn read it twice. There was nothing else on the page, no explanation, no final entry. She slowly looked toward Arthur. What did my grandfather mean? Arthur stared at the handwriting for several silent moments. His eyes reflected recognition more than surprise. Harold asked me a question many years ago, he said quietly. He wanted to know whether I'd ever noticed that office felt larger than it looked. Evelyn glanced around the room. The walls appeared ordinary enough, though the back wall seemed unusually thick beneath layers of old wood paneling. Did you answer him? Arthur smiled sadly. I told him I was just a porter. He rested one hand lightly against the paneled wall. He only nodded and said, Sometimes the things that matter most are the ones people stop seeing. Evelyn looked from her grandfather's notebook to the wall Arthur was touching. Whatever Harold had meant by his unfinished sentence, he had believed something still remained inside the abandoned station master's office. The station master's office occupied Evelyn's thoughts long after she returned to her rented room that evening. She spread the faded property map across the small kitchen table beside her grandfather's notebook. Harold Brooks had never been a man who enjoyed riddles. When he wrote something down, it usually served a practical purpose: the unfinished sentence. The station master's office was never completely empty, felt less like a mystery, and more like an instruction waiting for someone patient enough to understand it. Early the next morning, she visited the Millhaven Historical Museum, a modest brick building housed inside the town's former freight office. Shelves overflowed with photographs, railway timetables, station signs, and carefully labeled boxes of local records. A young woman arranging oversized maps looked up with an easy smile. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Evelyn replied. "I'm trying to learn more about the old railway station." Recognition crossed the woman's face. "You're the one who bought it." Evelyn laughed softly. "News really does travel quickly around here. Small towns have their own timetable." She climbed down from the ladder and extended her hand. "I'm Sophie Grant. I manage the museum archives." Evelyn explained how she had purchased the station, met Arthur Miller, and found Harold Brooks's notebook. She carefully avoided mentioning the fresh footprints, unsure whether they meant anything yet. Sophie listened closely before leading her toward a large archive table where several rolled engineering drawings rested inside protective tubes. "We have copies of the original station blueprints," she said. "They're incomplete, but they should help." Together, they carefully unrolled the largest sheet. The station appeared in remarkable detail. Waiting room, ticket office, baggage room, telegraph room, station master's office. Measurements covered every wall, doorway, and window. Evelyn studied the plan while Sophie compared it with a later renovation drawing completed decades afterward. "Something isn't right," Sophie murmured. She placed a ruler across both blueprints. "Look here." The original station master's office measured nearly 4 feet deeper than the renovated version. Yet the building's exterior dimensions never changed. Evelyn frowned. "Where did the extra space go?" Sophie checked another survey. The outside brick wall matched both drawings exactly. Only the interior measurement had changed. No notation explained the difference. "Maybe they remodeled the room," Evelyn suggested. Sophie slowly shook her head. "If they had, the renovation records would show it." They searched maintenance files, construction permits, and engineering reports. Several documented roof repairs and platform improvements over the years, but none mentioned reducing the office size. It was as though the missing space had quietly disappeared from official history. Evelyn opened Harold's notebook again, rereading the unfinished sentence. The station master's office was never completely empty. Suddenly, the words carried new weight. They weren't describing furniture or records. They might be describing the room itself. Before leaving, Sophie photocopied the blueprints. "If you're willing," she said, "I'd like to see the office myself sometime." Evelyn smiled. "I think my grandfather would have liked that." By early afternoon, they arrived at the station carrying copies of the plans, measuring tape, flashlights, and notebooks. Arthur was already there sweeping leaves from the platform. "Brought help?" he asked warmly. "History help," Evelyn replied. Inside the station master's office, Sophie compared the blueprints with the actual room. She measured each wall carefully while Evelyn recorded the numbers. Arthur watched quietly from the doorway. The front wall matched perfectly. The side wall matched as well. Only the rear wall created a problem. According to the original blueprint, the office should have extended nearly 4 feet farther toward the back of the station. Sophie lowered the measuring tape. "There's empty space somewhere." Evelyn walked slowly toward the rear wall. Old wooden paneling covered it from floor to ceiling, darker than the trim elsewhere in the room. She rested her hand against the smooth boards. They felt solid, but somehow different from the surrounding walls. Arthur spoke softly behind her. Older workers always joked the station master had more room than the rest of us. Evelyn turned. Did anyone ever question it? He smiled faintly. Not in those days. You didn't question the station master. While examining the floor beneath the wall, Evelyn noticed something else. A large oak bookcase stood tightly against the paneling, filled now with nothing except dust and empty shelves. Kneeling, she aimed her flashlight beneath its base. Long scrape marks crossed the wooden floorboards, extending several feet forward before disappearing beneath years of settled dust. They were too straight to have been made accidentally. She brushed away a thin layer of dirt with her sleeve. More parallel scrape marks appeared beneath. Someone had moved the heavy bookcase many times over the years. Evelyn slowly stood and looked at the silent wall behind it. Whatever her grandfather had wanted someone to find, every clue seemed to lead back to that single piece of furniture. Evelyn rested her hand against the side of the oak bookcase and pushed gently. It did not move. Years of dust and neglect had settled around its base, making the heavy piece seem almost part of the building itself. Arthur stepped beside her without being asked. "Let's try together," he said. Sophie set the measuring tape aside and helped clear loose debris from the floor. On the count of 3, Evelyn and Arthur leaned their weight against the bookcase. At first, nothing happened. Then the old wood groaned, and the cabinet slid forward several inches, scraping across the floor exactly along the worn marks Evelyn had noticed beneath it. Dust rose into the air, filling the room with the scent of aged timber. When it settled, the wall behind the bookcase came fully into view for the first time in decades. The wood paneling looked different from the surrounding walls. The grain ran vertically instead of horizontally, and the finish had darkened unevenly with age. Sophie crouched near the floor, brushing away years of dirt with a soft paintbrush she carried for handling historical objects. "Look at this," she said quietly. A narrow gap appeared where 2 panels met. It was so fine that it disappeared beneath ordinary light, but now the seam could be traced almost from floor to ceiling. Evelyn followed it with her fingertips. "This isn't decorative paneling." Arthur stepped closer, his weathered face growing strangely emotional. "Old station workers used to joke there was another office back here." He smiled sadly. "We always thought it was just one of those railway stories." Sophie tapped lightly against the wood with the handle of her flashlight. Most sections answered with a dull, solid sound. Near the center, however, the tone changed. A hollow echo answered from behind the panel. Evelyn looked toward Arthur. Neither of them spoke. The empty space shown on the blueprints suddenly felt very real. They examined the edges more carefully. Near waist height, hidden beneath layers of varnish and dust, Sophie noticed a tiny circular brass fitting no larger than a shirt button. "This doesn't belong," she whispered. Evelyn cleaned it gently with a cloth. The brass fitting wasn't decorative at all. It was a concealed keyhole, carefully disguised by matching wood stain. Arthur stared at it without blinking. "I've walked past this wall thousands of times," he murmured. "I never saw it." Evelyn remembered the ring of old brass keys the county clerk had given her when she officially purchased the station. Most had opened exterior doors and storage rooms. One small key remained unused. She retrieved the ring from her handbag and tested several keys. None fit until the smallest one slipped neatly into the hidden lock. Sophie quietly stepped back. Arthur removed his cap, almost instinctively. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before turning the key. Somewhere inside the wall, A soft metallic click echoed through the silent office. Nothing happened at first. Then one section of the wood panel shifted outward slightly, revealing a narrow gap no wider than her finger. Evelyn carefully gripped the edge and pulled. The concealed doorway swung inward on surprisingly smooth hinges, releasing a breath of cool, undisturbed air that had remained trapped for generations. Her flashlight beam reached only a few feet before darkness swallowed the rest of the room. Arthur stood motionless, tears quietly gathering in his eyes. "It was real," he whispered. "Harold was telling the truth all along." Evelyn stepped across the threshold. The hidden room was small but carefully built, with polished wood walls. A single desk facing a narrow window concealed behind exterior brick vents, and shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. Everything lay beneath a thick blanket of dust, yet almost nothing appeared damaged. It looked less like an abandoned storage space and more like someone had simply locked the door one evening and never returned. A leather chair still rested behind the desk. An old railway lamp remained beside neatly stacked document boxes. Framed photographs hung straight upon the walls. No signs of hurried departure, no evidence of vandalism. Just quiet order preserved by time itself. Sophie slowly entered behind her, unable to hide her amazement. "This wasn't forgotten," she whispered. "It was protected." Evelyn walked toward the desk, her heartbeat quickening with every step. Whatever her grandfather had spent years hinting at had remained untouched behind this wall, waiting patiently for someone willing to look beyond what everyone else believed they already understood. Evelyn stood quietly in the hidden office, afraid that even the sound of her footsteps might disturb the years that had been preserved there. Dust rested gently across every surface, yet nothing suggested abandonment. The station master had left the room in careful order, as though expecting to return the following morning. Arthur slowly removed his gloves before touching anything. "We should be careful," he said softly. "Places like this only stay untouched once." Sophie nodded in agreement. She unpacked archival gloves, a camera, and several document sleeves from her bag. "We photograph everything before moving it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's exactly what my grandfather would have done." They began with the desk. A brass railway lamp stood neatly beside an ink bottle that had long since dried. A station clock rested on the corner, stopped forever, at a different time than the large clock in the waiting room. Beneath the glass desktop lay carefully arranged railway notices, platform schedules, and handwritten reminders. Nothing appeared valuable in the ordinary sense, yet everything reflected remarkable care. Sophie photographed the desk from every angle before Evelyn gently opened the top drawer. Inside lay bundles of leather-bound journals tied with faded blue ribbon. Each spine carried only a year written in gold ink. Next to them rested passenger registers, ticket books, telegraph copies, family letters, railway correspondence, and dozens of carefully labeled envelopes. Arthur looked around the room in disbelief. "I thought every station record had gone to the archives." Evelyn carefully lifted the first journal. "Apparently not." She opened it near the beginning. Instead of financial reports or maintenance logs, the pages contained daily observations written by the station master in neat, steady handwriting. Weather conditions, delayed trains, platform repairs, notes about travelers needing assistance. The entries felt personal without becoming sentimental. Beside many passenger names appeared tiny handwritten symbols no larger than pencil marks. A lantern, a small tree, a bird, a compass, a pair of linked circles. Evelyn frowned. "These aren't ordinary station records." Sophie leaned closer. Those symbols appear intentionally repeated. Evelyn turned more pages. The same markings appeared beside only certain passengers. Most names remained untouched, yet whenever one of the symbols appeared, additional notes often followed. Arrived safely. Returned home. Ticket arranged. Lodging secured. Arthur quietly studied another register. I don't remember anyone using symbols like these. On a nearby shelf, they discovered carefully stacked passenger books arranged chronologically across nearly 30 years. Between them rested telegram collections tied neatly with cotton ribbon. Evelyn unfolded one at random. It thanked the station master for helping reunite a mother with her son after a missed connection. Another expressed gratitude for arranging safe overnight shelter during a winter storm. None carried official railway language. They sounded deeply personal. Sophie photographed each document before replacing it exactly where she had found it. These letters were saved deliberately. Evelyn nodded. Someone wanted the stories to stay together. Along the opposite wall stood narrow filing shelves containing family photographs. Most showed ordinary travelers standing on the platform beside steam locomotives. Others captured station employees sharing meals or waving goodbye to departing passengers. Many faces appeared only once. Some photographs included handwritten names on the back. Others contained only the same mysterious symbols found inside the journals. Arthur picked up one faded picture showing a young boy standing beside the station master. I remember him, he whispered. His parents never arrived on the train they were supposed to meet. He paused thoughtfully. A few days later, they all left together. Evelyn looked at the symbol drawn beside the boy's name. It matched the small bird she had seen repeatedly inside the journals. She carefully returned the photograph to its place. Nothing in the room suggested hidden wealth or official secrets. Everything pointed instead toward ordinary people whose journeys had somehow mattered deeply to the station master. Near the bottom shelf, Evelyn discovered several leather-bound passenger registers unlike any she had seen before. Their pages listed ticket numbers, arrival times, destinations, and names in perfect order. Yet scattered throughout the registers, the same handwritten symbols quietly appeared beside selected travelers. Every mark had been added using the same careful penmanship. She compared several years. The pattern never changed. The symbols followed people rather than dates or train routes. Sophie rested one finger lightly beside a marked entry. These can't be ticket classifications. Evelyn slowly shook her head. No. She closed the register and looked around the hidden office once more. Every journal, telegram, photograph, and passenger book had been preserved with extraordinary care, not because they recorded famous events, but because together they documented something someone believed should never disappear. She gently reopened one journal and traced her finger beneath another passenger's name marked with a small lantern symbol. Arthur, she asked quietly, why would the station master secretly mark certain passengers while leaving everyone else exactly the same? Arthur stared at the symbol for several long moments before quietly admitting, that's something none of us were ever told. The hidden office became Evelyn's world over the next several days. She and Sophie agreed that nothing should leave the room until every document had been photographed and its original location carefully recorded. Arthur unlocked the station each morning before they arrived and quietly swept the platform while they worked, saying the building deserved to welcome visitors properly, even if no trains stopped there anymore. Evelyn smiled each time she saw him straighten an old bench or wipe dust from the station sign. The forgotten building no longer felt abandoned. It felt patient. Sophie spread copies of the passenger registers across a large table inside the waiting room rather than risk damaging the originals. Alongside them, she placed census records, newspaper archives, immigration lists, and county birth and death records from the museum collection. "If these symbols identify people," she said, "the answer should appear somewhere outside the station." Evelyn began with the small bird symbol. It appeared beside dozens of passengers over many years. Most traveled alone. Some had no return tickets recorded. Sophie searched local newspapers from the same dates. Within an hour, she found a report describing several orphaned children arriving by train after a factory explosion in another county. The arrival date matched one of the entries marked with the bird. Evelyn checked another register. Different year, same symbol. Another newspaper described children relocated after a devastating flood. Again, the dates aligned perfectly. "The bird isn't random," Evelyn said quietly. "It follows children traveling without parents." Sophie nodded as she made careful notes. Next, they examined the lantern symbol. Every passenger marked with it appeared during harsh winters or periods of widespread unemployment. Newspaper reports described injured railway workers, elderly widows, and people stranded after missing connections. Many remained in Millhaven for several days before continuing their journeys. "They all needed somewhere safe," Sophie observed. Evelyn turned another page. Beside nearly every lantern symbol, the station master had written short remarks. "Warm meal arranged, lodging secured, departed safely." She looked toward the hidden office. The entries sounded less like railway business and more like quiet acts of compassion. The tree symbol revealed another pattern. Immigration records showed newly arrived families entering the region with little money and few local contacts. Several later appeared in census records as successful farmers or shopkeepers. The compass marked passengers searching for relatives after wars or industrial accidents. The linked circles often appeared beside reunited families traveling together after long separations. Every symbol represented people facing difficult moments rather than ordinary travelers. Evelyn leaned back slowly. The station master wasn't tracking tickets. He was tracking people who needed help, Sophie finished. Arthur listened silently as they explained their findings later that afternoon. He looked through the copied pages before smiling sadly. "There were always people waiting after the last train left," he said. "Children who looked frightened, mothers traveling alone, old men carrying everything they owned in one suitcase." He paused. The station master never turned anyone away. Evelyn thought about the journals filled with quiet observations. None praised the station master. None described him as extraordinary. They simply recorded what happened, one person at a time. Late that day, another pickup truck stopped outside the station. A neatly dressed man stepped onto the platform carrying a leather portfolio. He introduced himself politely. "Ryan Cooper. I oversee redevelopment projects for the county." Evelyn recognized the name from the auction paperwork. "You're connected to the proposed parking expansion." "That's right." His voice remained friendly. "I heard someone finally purchased the station." Evelyn invited him inside. Ryan slowly walked through the waiting room, studying the worn ticket counter and cracked windows. "It's a beautiful building," he admitted. "Unfortunately, restoration costs can become overwhelming." Evelyn smiled politely. "I'm beginning to understand that." He handed her a business card. "If restoring the station proves impossible, my company would be interested in purchasing the property. We'd preserve what historical features we reasonably could." There was no pressure in his words, only practical honesty. Evelyn appreciated that. "Thank you," she replied. I'll keep it in mind. Ryan nodded respectfully before leaving. Arthur watched his truck disappear down the road. "Good man," he said. "Just sees the future differently." Evelyn slipped the business card into her notebook without comment. Her attention returned to the journals spread across the desk. Near the end of one volume, she noticed a phrase repeated several times in the station master's handwriting. "Travelers transferred to the safe platform." The words appeared again 2 pages later. Another family escorted through the safe platform. Unlike the symbols, the phrase was written plainly, almost as though the writer expected someone reading the journal to understand exactly what it meant. Evelyn searched another journal. The same words appeared again and again across different years. She looked toward Arthur. Did this station ever have a place called the safe platform? Arthur's expression changed instantly. The color seemed to leave his face as he stared at the page. After several long moments, he answered in a quiet voice, "I haven't heard those words since the station closed." Arthur remained silent long enough that Evelyn wondered if he had changed his mind about answering. He looked through the station window toward the empty platform where weeds now pushed between weathered boards. "The safe platform wasn't marked on any timetable," he said at last. "Passengers never bought tickets to it. Most people never knew it existed." Sophie leaned forward. "Was it another platform?" Arthur shook his head gently. "Not exactly. It was what the station master called the people waiting for someone who had nowhere else to go." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" Arthur rested both hands on his walking stick. "Sometimes children arrived alone because their parents had died. Sometimes immigrants stepped off the train with no family waiting. Sometimes widows missed their connections after spending everything they had on one ticket. The station master refused to leave them sitting on the benches overnight." Evelyn thought of the journals filled with brief notes. Warm meal arranged, lodging secured, departed safely. Suddenly, the words carried much greater meaning. "He found them somewhere safe to stay." Arthur nodded. "A boarding house, a church, sometimes a railway family opened their own home. Nobody called it charity." "Why not?" Sophie asked quietly. Arthur smiled sadly. "Because people had already lost enough. They didn't need to lose their pride, too." Evelyn slowly reopened one of the journals. The station master had recorded every person who received help, but never described them as helpless. He simply noted what had been arranged before recording that they continued their journey. There were no speeches, no praise, only quiet responsibility. Over the next several days, Evelyn and Sophie examined more of the hidden office. Every journal reinforced the same pattern. The symbols protected identities rather than creating classifications. The bird followed orphaned children until relatives could be located. The lantern marked travelers needing temporary shelter. The tree appeared beside immigrant families beginning new lives. The compass identified those searching for loved ones. The linked circles quietly celebrated reunions that almost never appeared in official railway records. The station master had transformed ordinary passenger registers into a private record of compassion without exposing anyone's hardship. While organizing another shelf, Sophie discovered a bundle of personal letters tied neatly with blue ribbon. Unlike the telegrams, these were addressed directly to the station master. One thanked him for arranging temporary work until a father could afford tickets west. Another expressed gratitude for helping an elderly widow reach her daughter before winter. A third simply read, "You treated us like we still mattered." None of the letters requested repayment. None mentioned recognition. Evelyn carefully replaced each one exactly where it had rested for decades. "He saved these because they explained the journals," she said softly. not because they thanked him. Arthur nodded. He always believed kindness should leave a record, even if the people behind it stayed unknown. Near the back of one cabinet, Evelyn found another folder labeled only with years. Inside were handwritten notes in her grandfather Harold's familiar script. They were not journals, but reminders to himself. Preserve every register. Never separate the letters. The symbols protect people, not secrets. One sentence stood alone near the end of the final page. Recognition belongs to the story, never to the helper. Evelyn smiled sadly. It sounded exactly like the man who had spent Saturday mornings teaching her that railway stations carried hope. Sophie looked up from another shelf. Your grandfather understood why this office had to remain hidden. Evelyn nodded quietly. He wasn't protecting a room. He was protecting the people inside these pages. As afternoon sunlight faded across the hidden office, Arthur opened a small cabinet beneath the station master's desk that they had not yet examined. Most of it contained neatly stacked writing paper and unused envelopes. At the very back rested one heavier envelope sealed with dark red wax. Dust covered it, but the seal remained unbroken. Across the front, written in careful handwriting, appeared a simple message. To whoever opens this office. Evelyn recognized immediately that it was different from every other document they had found. The handwriting belonged to the station master himself. Arthur quietly removed his cap once again. Sophie lowered her camera without taking another photograph. Neither spoke. Evelyn lifted the sealed envelope carefully into the fading afternoon light. Whatever answers remained inside the hidden office, it seemed the station master had been waiting many years to share them with exactly the person willing to open that door. Evelyn held the sealed envelope for several moments before breaking the wax. The station master's handwriting across the front was steady despite its age, as though he had expected this letter to be opened someday by someone patient enough to understand everything that surrounded it. Sophie quietly photographed the unopened envelope before setting the camera aside. Arthur stood near the doorway with his cap in his hands, saying nothing. Evelyn carefully unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with time, but the ink remained clear. She began reading aloud. If this office has been opened, then someone has taken the time to look beyond abandoned walls and forgotten records. That gives me hope. She paused briefly before continuing. Many people will wonder why this room was hidden. Some will expect money, secrets, or scandal. They will find none of those things here. What they will find is evidence that ordinary people chose kindness when no rule required it. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. The words sounded calm, practical, and deeply familiar, much like her grandfather's notebook. She continued reading. The journals, passenger registers, telegrams, letters, and photographs must never be separated. Alone, each document becomes an interesting memory. Together, they prove that this station served a purpose beyond trains and schedules. Together, they tell the truth. Sophie quietly wiped away a tear before returning her attention to the letter. The station master explained that the symbols beside passenger names had never been intended to create secret records. They existed to protect identities. Runaway children, widows, immigrants, injured workers, and stranded travelers deserved assistance without carrying the weight of public attention for the rest of their lives. Their names were replaced so future generations would remember compassion without exposing personal hardship. A record should preserve dignity as carefully as it preserves facts. Evelyn read, If those who received help are remembered only for needing help, then these journals have failed their purpose. Arthur closed his eyes. He believed that until his last day. He whispered. The final page explained why the office itself had been concealed. The station master feared that after the railway closed, documents would be scattered, discarded, or collected individually until the larger story disappeared. Only by preserving everything together inside the hidden office could the complete truth survive. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her grandfather's notebook. Harold Brooks had understood exactly what the station master intended. That was why he left only small clues instead of revealing the office outright. He wanted the room discovered by someone willing to preserve it rather than simply uncover it. The following morning, Evelyn and Sophie organized digital photographs of every journal, register, telegram, and letter before disturbing nothing else inside the hidden office. Each shelf was documented in sequence. Every photograph showed not only the documents themselves, but where they had originally rested. The arrangement formed part of the history. Later that afternoon, Sophie's phone rang. After listening quietly, she looked toward Evelyn with concern. That was the county planning office. Evelyn immediately recognized the expression on her face. What happened? The redevelopment proposal moved forward this morning. Arthur looked up sharply. Sophie continued. The station hasn't been protected yet, unless an emergency preservation request is approved. Demolition planning can begin within days. The words settled heavily inside the hidden office. Evelyn looked around the room one more time. The journals, passenger registers, family letters, photographs, and the station master's final message had survived unnoticed for decades. Now, after waiting all those years, they faced disappearing before anyone beyond this room understood what they meant. Arthur slowly rested one hand on the old desk. We don't have much time. Evelyn picked up the station master's letter once more before carefully returning it to its protective sleeve. Then she looked toward Sophie. The documents are ready. She turned toward Arthur. The story is ready. Finally, she looked through the hidden office doorway toward the silent station platform beyond. Now we have to save the station before it's too late. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the station carrying organized copies of every journal, passenger register, telegram, photograph, and letter from the hidden office. The originals remained exactly where they had been found, protected behind the concealed doorway until preservation specialists could examine them properly. Harold Brooks had preserved the room by leaving everything together, and Evelyn intended to honor that decision. Sophie met her with archival storage boxes, a portable scanner, and a checklist prepared by the State Historical Preservation Office. We'll document every shelf exactly as it stands, she said. Nothing gets separated. Evelyn smiled. That's what both my grandfather and the station master wanted. They spent hours creating certified digital copies while recording where every document belonged inside the hidden office. Passenger registers remained connected to matching journals. Telegrams stayed beside the letters explaining them. Photographs were cataloged with the entries that identified the travelers they portrayed. No single document attempted to tell the story alone. Together they formed a complete record of quiet compassion carried out over decades. Arthur unlocked display cabinets and old storage rooms, searching for anything that might support the hidden office's history. Near the baggage room, he uncovered a weathered platform sign that simply read, Waiting Room. Smiling softly, he carried it into the station master's office. Funny thing, he said. The people who needed the station most probably spent more time waiting than traveling. Evelyn placed the sign beside the journals for photography. Late that afternoon, Sophie received confirmation from the State Preservation Office. After reviewing the digital archive, historians agreed the documents appeared authentic and historically significant. An emergency inspection team would arrive the following morning. "They're especially interested in how complete everything is," Sophie explained. "Most collections like this are scattered over time. This one stayed intact." Evelyn looked toward the hidden office. "Because someone made sure it did." The inspectors arrived shortly after sunrise. Historians, archivists, and preservation specialists carefully entered the concealed room, photographing every wall before examining the journals one page at a time. The station master's final letter was compared with railway correspondence preserved in regional archives. The handwriting matched. Passenger registers were checked against surviving railway schedules. Dates aligned perfectly. Telegraph messages corresponded with newspaper reports and census records Sophie had already collected. Every document strengthened another. No one questioned whether the hidden office was genuine. The only discussion centered on how remarkable it was that everything had survived together. News of the discovery spread quickly through Millhaven. The local newspaper published a front-page story about the hidden station master's office and its carefully preserved journals documenting quiet acts of kindness. Within days, families began arriving at the station carrying faded photographs, old train tickets, telegrams, and handwritten letters discovered inside attics and family Bibles. One elderly woman recognized her grandmother's name inside a passenger register marked with the lantern symbol. Her family had always known a kind station employee helped them after a winter storm stranded them for 3 days. But no one knew his name. Another man brought a photograph showing his father standing beside the station master after arriving alone as a child during the war. The small bird symbol appeared beside his name exactly as it did in the journals. Sophie carefully copied every family document before returning the originals. Each story fit naturally beside the records already preserved inside the hidden office. Arthur quietly answered historians' questions throughout the week. At first, he spoke only about station operations, train schedules, and daily routines. Eventually, he began sharing what he had witnessed during his years as a porter. "Nobody ever announced they were helping people," he explained. "The station master simply noticed who needed someone. Railway workers collected coats. Shopkeepers donated meals. Families offered spare bedrooms. By morning, everyone acted as though nothing unusual had happened." He paused before adding, "That's exactly how the station master wanted it." Ryan Cooper returned to the station after reading the newspaper article. He walked slowly through the waiting room before standing silently inside the hidden office. After several minutes, he turned toward Evelyn. "I thought I was looking at an abandoned building," he admitted. "Turns out I was looking at a place where people quietly rebuilt lives." Evelyn smiled gently. "That's why it matters." Ryan nodded. "I understand that now." As the emergency review concluded, the Historic Preservation Board scheduled a final public meeting to determine the station's future. Historians submitted formal reports. Archivists confirmed the integrity of the hidden office. Families filled the meeting hall carrying copies of photographs and letters that had become part of the growing historical record. Evelyn sat beside Sophie and Arthur in the front row, her grandfather's notebook resting inside her hands. She remembered the day she had walked into the county auction believing she had nothing left except $1,000 and a lifetime of memories. Now she understood why Harold had treasured the old station without ever fully explaining it. The board chair gathered the final recommendations, thanked everyone who had contributed, and looked across the crowded room before quietly announcing, "The Historic Preservation Board will now proceed to its final vote." The meeting room fell completely silent as the Historic Preservation Board members finished marking their ballots. Evelyn sat beside Arthur and Sophie with her grandfather's notebook resting quietly in her hands. Only a few weeks earlier, she had walked out of a courthouse believing every chapter of her life had already been written. Her home was gone. Her savings had nearly vanished. Even the future she had carefully planned for decades seemed to have disappeared. Yet somehow, one impulsive decision to spend her last $1,000 on an abandoned railway station had brought her to this room. The chairperson gathered the ballots, counted them twice, then looked toward the audience with a gentle smile. "The motion passes unanimously," she announced. Effective immediately, the Millhaven Railway Station is granted permanent historic protection, including the hidden station master's office and its complete archival collection. Applause filled the room, growing steadily until nearly everyone stood. Arthur quietly removed his railway cap and held it against his chest. Sophie wiped tears from her face without trying to hide them. Evelyn simply closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the words settle. The station would remain. Within days, demolition plans were permanently canceled. Preservation architects stabilized the roof, repaired damaged brickwork, and reinforced the aging platform while carefully preserving the building's original appearance. Nothing unnecessary was replaced. The worn ticket counter remained where generations of travelers had once waited. The station clock stayed frozen at 12 minutes past 4, exactly as Evelyn first found it. Even the old benches remained, carrying the marks of countless passengers who had rested there over the decades. The hidden station master's office received the greatest care of all. Conservators documented every shelf before removing each journal. Passenger register, telegram, photograph, and letter for preservation. After treatment, every item returned to the exact place where it had originally rested. The concealed doorway remained hidden behind the restored bookcase, but visitors could now enter through a carefully guided tour that explained how the room had survived untouched for generations. Historians completed their research over the following months. The journals confirmed that the station master had quietly transformed an ordinary railway station into a place of refuge. Runaway children were reunited with relatives. Immigrant families received temporary shelter until work could be found. Injured railway workers were helped home. Widows stranded during winter storms received meals and lodging without embarrassment. Anonymous train tickets appeared whenever someone could not afford to continue their journey. The symbols inside the passenger registers had never identified debts or privileges. They quietly protected people whose difficult moments deserved compassion instead of public attention. Harold Brooks understood that those journals mattered only if they remained together. That was why he left clues instead of answers. He trusted that someday someone would discover the hidden office with enough patience to preserve its purpose, rather than simply reveal its existence. As newspapers shared the story beyond Millhaven, families traveled from neighboring states carrying photographs, letters, and memories passed down through generations. One elderly man recognized the station master's handwriting on a telegram his mother had treasured until her death. A woman discovered that the bird symbol beside a child's name belonged to her grandfather, who had arrived alone after losing both parents during an epidemic. Another family found a faded photograph matching one displayed inside the hidden office. Piece by piece, forgotten journeys returned to the people who had lived them. Arthur volunteered at the restored station several mornings each week. Visitors gathered around him as he described the sounds of arriving steam trains, the smell of coal smoke drifting across the platform, and the quiet kindness that filled the station after the last train departed each evening. He never spoke as though the station master had been a hero. Instead, he reminded visitors that dozens of ordinary railway workers local families, church members, merchants, and neighbors quietly made those acts of compassion possible. Sophie expanded the museum archives, connecting family donations with passenger registers until the hidden office became one of the most complete collections of community railway history in the region. Researchers came not because of famous locomotives or engineering achievements, but because the records documented something rarely preserved with such care: ordinary people choosing to help strangers without expecting recognition. Ryan Cooper visited again after restoration was complete. Standing beside the platform one afternoon, he watched families walking slowly through the waiting room before entering the hidden office. "I almost saw this place disappear," he admitted. Evelyn smiled gently. "So did I." Ryan nodded. "I'm grateful neither of us gave up on it." Evelyn accepted a position managing the restored station alongside the museum archives. She often unlocked the front doors before sunrise, just as station employees once had generations earlier. The waiting room remained peaceful in those early hours. Sunlight filtered through restored windows, touching the polished ticket counter before reaching the hidden office beyond the bookcase. She never entered that room without thinking of her grandfather. 1 year after the station reopened, the town dedicated a permanent exhibit titled Journeys of Quiet Kindness. At its entrance stood a simple inscription taken from the station master's final letter. Together, these records tell the truth. Visitors paused there before beginning the tour. Some entered expecting railway history. Most left carrying something much deeper. One quiet afternoon, a little girl studying the passenger registers looked up at Evelyn and asked, "Why didn't the station master tell everyone what he was doing?" Evelyn smiled and glanced toward the shelves filled with journals, letters, and photographs. "Because he wanted the people he helped to remember hope," she answered softly. "Not hardship." The child thought about that for a moment, before nodding and continuing through the hidden office. After the visitors had gone home that evening, Evelyn remained alone on the old platform. The tracks stretched into the distance beneath the setting sun, silent now except for birds settling into nearby trees. She remembered standing outside the courthouse, convinced that her life had reached its end. Losing her home had felt like losing her future. Spending her last $1,000 on an abandoned station had seemed almost impossible to explain. Yet standing there now, she finally understood what her grandfather had tried to teach her all those years ago. Railway stations were never simply places where trains arrived and departed. They were places where hope quietly changed direction. The greatest purchase she ever made had not been an abandoned building. It had been the chance to preserve proof that compassion leaves tracks no passing train can erase. And as each new visitor stepped through the hidden office, reading the journals of ordinary people who quietly changed the lives of strangers, the station master's final journey continued, one heart at a time. A year after the station reopened, the sound of footsteps had returned to the old platform. Not the hurried footsteps of passengers chasing trains, but the quiet footsteps of people searching for stories. Every morning, Evelyn unlocked the front door before the first visitors arrived. She would pause for a moment beneath the old station clock, still frozen at 12 minutes past 4, and smile. Some things, she had learned, didn't need to move to keep changing lives. Families now traveled from across the country to visit the little railway station that almost disappeared. Many arrived because they loved old trains. Most left because they discovered something far more valuable. Inside the hidden station master's office, visitors slowly turned the pages of journals filled with ordinary names and extraordinary kindness. Some recognized a grandparent in an old photograph. Others found a family letter they never knew existed. A few simply sat quietly on the wooden bench outside, needing a moment before walking back into the world. One afternoon, an elderly man stood in front of a passenger register for nearly an hour. When he finally turned toward Evelyn, tears filled his eyes. "My mother always said a stranger bought her a train ticket when she was a little girl," he whispered. "She never knew who." Evelyn gently pointed toward the station master's journal resting beside the register. "Maybe," she said softly. "He never wanted her to know." The man smiled through his tears. "I think you're right." Moments like that became the station's greatest treasure. Not the journals, not the hidden office, not even the building itself. It was the quiet realization that kindness often survives long after the people who give it are gone. Sometimes, after the museum closed for the evening, Evelyn would step into the hidden office alone. She never rearranged a single journal, never moved a photograph, never changed the order her grandfather had protected for so many years. Instead, she would simply stand there in the silence and remember something Harold Brooks used to tell her as they watched trains together. Every station is a place where someone begins again. As a child, she thought he was talking about travel. Now she knew he had been talking about life. She once believed losing everything meant her story was over. Her home was gone. Her savings were almost gone. The future she had planned had disappeared. But if none of that had happened, she never would have walked into an abandoned railway station. She never would have found the hidden office. And thousands of forgotten journeys might have remained hidden forever. That old station had cost her $1,000. It gave her something priceless, a reason to begin again. If this story leaves us with one lesson, perhaps it is this: the places the world calls abandoned are sometimes only waiting for someone willing to care. The people history forgets are often the ones who quietly changed the most lives. And the greatest legacy we can leave behind is not wealth, recognition, or success. It is making sure that here, someone else's journey became a little safer, a little kinder, and a little less lonely.